Hello, and welcome to the Kink Perspective. My name's Chris. I'm a psychotherapist and consultant. On today's show, we're going to talk about something that most people in the lifestyle fear, but don't always actually have the words for. And today, I'm going to talk about being outed in the community. Outing someone in kink just isn't about gossip. It's really a breach of consent. It betrays someone's trust, and it can actually have real emotional and sometimes even physical consequences. Now, whether it happens out of ignorance or intention, the damage it causes is long-lasting, and it deserves to be named for what it is. Before I get into the show today, though, I want to thank all of you who continue to support this show and to welcome anyone who's tuning in for the first time. Your messages, your questions, your shares, your continued encouragement to keep all of this going is what truly drives me to keep doing this show. If you haven't already, I do ask, please subscribe, follow, rate the show if you're listening to me on Spotify, 5 stars, wherever you're listening. This allows it for other people to find it. It allows it to keep growing. It allows me to keep the show for free, as I've been doing all of these years. But if you want to support the work that I do directly, there is a donation link in the show's description. You're more than welcome. Any amount does help, but never necessary. So today, this is going to be a grounded conversation. It's not just about what happened even to me recently, because I am going to talk about that today, but about the deeper harm that outing can cause and why this matters for all of us who live this life, whether it's quietly or, like some of us do, quite out loud. So first, let's start by defining what outing actually is, because I think in kink spaces, it's not always understood the way it should be. Outing in this context is when someone else shares another person's involvement in the lifestyle, whether it's BDSM, a power exchange, whatever, they may be into, without that person's clear and enthusiastic consent. And we talk about consent a lot, and we talk about it in other contexts, but I think here it even applies quite heavily. And that can mean talking about someone's role or posting about, their participation, revealing where they play, who they play with, where they live, where they work, or what dynamics they engage in. It doesn't have to be aggressive or cruel to be damaging. Sometimes people do it casually, they might do it jokingly, or even think that they're maybe being supportive, but the results are still the same. They've taken someone's private truth and they've made it public without permission. Now, let's not pretend we don't know how this can look. Maybe, there's someone at a grocery store saying, "Hey, John, great spanking scene the other night," not realizing or maybe not even caring that the other people around John don't know anything about that part of his life. Or someone tagging a person in a social media comment where, Facebook, on Twitter or Instagram, Fetlife, Fetish, doesn't matter where it's at. "Hey, loved watching you take that beating." And the person being tagged, they have a vanilla job or they have a family that does, follow them on social media, or they just don't want their personal business out there. And maybe it's sharing that someone is in a polycule or is a submissive or a dominant or into something specific that they haven't openly discussed with anyone. These are all forms of outing. Now, it doesn't matter how harmless the intent might be. It doesn't matter if the person doing it thinks the whole world is kink friendly or that the person being outed should just own it. It's not their call to make. And everyone in this space, whether they're new or they've been around for a while or decades, they get to decide who knows what about their personal life. That includes where they live, where they play, if they play, what they do in or outside of the dynamic or the bedroom. And this isn't up for a public discussion just because someone else is curious or angry or trying to even make a point. And yes, this even applies when someone has a public voice. And that's something I'm going to address very clearly, because just because someone writes or teaches, educates, gives demonstrations, or speaks openly about kink, it doesn't mean every detail of their life is up for grabs. Having a public persona is not the same as giving up the right to privacy. I might speak about psychological themes. I might, talk about patterns or trauma work or even examples from my professional life, but that doesn't mean I've invited in anyone to speculate, dig into, or expose my personal identity. And there's a boundary there. It's a line. And someone crossed it. Because they weren't being nosy, they were intending to violate my consent. And outing someone strips them of the right to decide what parts of themselves they share. That's why it's harmful. That's why it can't be brushed off or justified under the, well, I thought it was fine, or, hey, they're a public figure anyway. We all have the right to manage how we are seen, and no one else gets to take that from us. And that includes everybody, and that includes me, and that includes all of you. Now, there's a story that I read not too long ago that really stuck with me, and one I think about often when this topic of outing comes up. There was a woman that was attending a local event, something she, had done for years without issue. She was known in her community, but she kept her personal and professional lives completely separate, like a lot of us do. Now, one night, someone had recognized her, someone she knew casually through the scene, but instead of respecting that space or holding any discretion for her, they brought it up in front of all of her coworkers, and they did it loudly, and they did it publicly, and they did it during a casual work function. Now, the comment wasn't initially meant to protect her or to try to even connect. It was quite the opposite. It was meant to expose her. Something along the lines of, hey, funny seeing you here after that wild scene last weekend. Now, everyone's face around her froze. Her boss heard it. The HR rep caught wind of it later that day, and within a week she got called into a meeting and was asked to explain herself, not because she had done anything inappropriate at work, but because someone decided they had the right to talk about a part of her private life without her permission. Now, she wasn't fired, and although she had a lot of people do in their contracts that they sign, they have an exposure for the company, right? But her authority got questioned, and some of her coworkers never actually looked at her the same way. And after a few months, she ended up leaving her job, not because she wanted to, but because the trust that had been eroded and the workplace had turned cold, and people looked at her differently. Now, this wasn't about kink shame. This was about losing control over who gets to know you, and when, and on what terms. And unfortunately, this kind of exposure is no longer rare. Just a few days ago, I experienced my own version of this. Someone affiliated with a San Francisco-based kink group decided to publicly post information about where my website was hosted and speculated about the country I live in. Now, they didn't just disagree with me or challenge something that I had written. They decided to go and dig into my life. Now, this wasn't actually an accident. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It was an intentional act designed to breach my privacy. Now, I don't talk about my private life on public forums for a reason, because it just detracts from the work that I do. I keep boundaries in place, not because I'm ashamed, but because I've had to take steps to protect myself from an incident that I had years ago with somebody that I worked with. And I have actually commented on that publicly, because I had somebody I worked with that was in distress, and I became the focal point of their anger. And during that, they ended up making some veiled comments towards family because they decided to look into my life. That was dealt with in the legal world. But the problem is, not everyone who disagrees with you stops just at words. And when that post went up this past weekend, my first reaction wasn't anger, it was panic, because that post was public for over 6 hours. Now, I don't know who saw it. I don't know if anybody gave it any weight. I didn't know if the person who I've dealt with in the past had even come across it, if they still watch me. I don't know. And I didn't know what it absolutely might trigger next for them or for me. But this wasn't about having an opinion. It was about power. It was about someone taking a swing at my privacy for no other reason than to undermine it. Now, these people exist in every community, and they present themselves as righteous, justified, or simply just, we're telling the truth. The irony behind this is that the criticism that I received is the exact same thing that they attempt to do without any legitimacy. But they do it for profit. That's a whole different other thing. And I'm not going to go ahead. I've already spoken about education for profit earlier this year. If that's what they're doing, that's fine. I'm not here to criticize that. But you don't get to judge me for the work that I do and then publicly put my life out there. and put me in some danger just because you want to have a dig at me. But what they were actually doing here is tearing down my right to safety. And when other people do this to others, they're tearing down that right to safety. And this is what people miss. Outing someone just isn't a conversation. It's not just a comment on a post. It can ripple into someone's safety, someone's job, their relationships, their family life, and someone's peace of mind. And what hurts the most in moments like that, it's not just the exposure here. It's loss of control. It's feeling like you've been cornered or, having something ripped out of your hands and no way to get it back. Now, whether you're out online or in a conference room or at a work function, at a family place, or at the supermarket, it cuts deep. It forces people to defend parts of themselves they may not, have been ready to or want to explain. There is no justification for what we do inside of this world. I don't, talk about somebody's sex life if I'm out and make them feel confronted. So when we talk about the impact of outing, this is what I mean. It's not theoretical, it's personal. And it can destabilize a person's sense of safety in an instant. And the aftershocks don't just fade because the comment got deleted or they got blocked or they even apologized. The damage lingers because trust doesn't come back easily. And a lot of us have worked in jobs where possibly that has put our families in danger in the past. So these things then become trauma responses. But I'm going to get into that. Because there is a psychological toll here of being outed. And let's really talk about what happens after someone's been outed. Because for a lot of people, the real damage isn't just in the moment, it's in every moment that follows. The emotional toll here doesn't wear off once the comment's deleted, right? Or once they back off, or even once they stop talking about it. What you're left with is a deep, ongoing sense of exposure. You start looking over your shoulder, you question who knows what, who saw what, who might say something next to you, who might want to continue trying to talk to you about it. And one of the most common reactions is hypervigilance. Your nervous system gets stuck in overdrive. You walk into rooms, your guard is up, right? It's not physically, but emotionally. You starting to watch who's checking you out, what's being said, who's tagging you, who's reading what. Your sense of safety in everyday spaces starts to shrink. And people don't realize that being outed doesn't just hurt your feelings, it makes your entire world feel unstable. Even if the risk is no longer immediate, your body doesn't always know that. And the constant scan for danger and that tightening in your chest and that urge to hide and disappear, that actually becomes real. And shame is another major piece here, right? Not because kink is inherently shameful, but because shame creeps in when your boundaries have been violated and you feel helpless to stop it. You start wondering if you should have kept quieter, trusted few people, made fewer posts, said less about your identity. You internalize someone else's bad behavior, and the shame doesn't always come from the kink itself. It comes from being stripped of the power to choose who gets to see that part of you. And then there's the social withdrawal aspect, which is something I've seen time and time again, both personally and professionally. After being outed, many people pull back from the very communities that once gave them a sense of belonging, a place that they called home. They stop maybe going to munches. They definitely step back from events. They may delete their social media accounts. They may ghost people they once trusted, right? They collapse back into themselves. And the withdrawal here isn't about being dramatic. It becomes a survival response. If the space that we are intending to create as a community is meant to be safe, right? And it's a place where we are allowed to be turned on, even in some sort of small ways. When we enter it now, after being outed, your brain and body start making decisions that prioritize your escape over any type of connection you want to make. And sometimes that isolation just feeds more fear, more shame, and more grief. And the ripple effects can reach even further. Jobs, families, friendships, housing, legal custody situations. And I've seen that as well. I've seen people lose promotions because if someone pulled up their Fetlife profile and whispered about it behind closed doors. I've read those articles. I've talked to people that after they've been doxxed and wondered if they needed to relocate. I've seen that article multiple times on social media. I've heard from dominants and submissives whose families have cut them off after discovering about their private life. Not because of anything dangerous, but because someone else made a private truth public ammunition and used it against them. If we look at this from a different lens here, outing is processed as a trauma event, not because it always results in a violence or loss, but because it triggers the same core psychological injury, the sudden, forced loss of control. And you didn't get to choose it. You sure as hell didn't get to consent. And now you're left to pick up the pieces. And that's why the fallout can feel so disproportionate. The symptoms mimic what we see in trauma responses: panic attacks, emotional shutdown, insomnia, compulsive monitoring, even sometimes disassociation. People often don't connect it at first. They think, oh, it was just a post or it was only a comment, but their body actually knows different. Their safety got breached, and once you know what that feels like, you don't ever forget it. Outing someone doesn't just pull back the curtain. It can dismantle the entire foundation they built to feel safe in their own identity. And rebuilding that, reclaiming your story, your space, your voice, that takes time. Part of why I'm doing the show today is so I can take this back from what was stripped away from me, from the stress that this put on me this past weekend, from the phone calls I had to make to family to be careful. I'm not looking for sympathy, and I don't need people to come and tell me I'm so sorry. That's not what I'm after here. I'm showing you this example, and I'm talking about my example today because I want you to hear that this can happen to anyone. And it's not okay. I could easily go and attack people with my platform and say things and be very veiled about it, but it can cause real world damage. So to heal, it takes support. It takes us to reaching out to our friends, to others, to start to get past these incidents. And it takes a community that understands that this isn't just drama, it's actually harm. So let's now talk about breach of consent and ethics. Let's really talk about what outing really is when we strip away the noise. I said this before, it's a consent violation, and it's plain and simple. Consent doesn't just apply to scenes or our bodies or our dynamics. It's about how we share information, how we speak to one another, and how we hold what someone else entrusts us with. When someone shares their identity or their lifestyle or even their just presence at a kink event, it's not an open invitation for you to share it further. That's not yours to hand out. And this is where a lot of people, I think, miss the mark, especially on our online spaces. Now, there's not a lot of anonymity online. If you're sharing your life, yep, that's public, right? There's an assumption that if I'm speaking publicly or somebody's teaching a class or they're running a group, they've somehow forfeited their right to privacy. Well, that's not how this works. Public presence is not the same as full exposure. And community etiquette, at least in the spaces that claim to care about ethics, has always held one clear, unwritten rule. You don't out people, period. And it doesn't matter how you feel about them. It doesn't matter what you disagree on. It doesn't matter how visible you think they already are. If that information wasn't shared with you for an explicit purpose of being spread, then sharing it became a violation. And in this case, this became intentional malice. And they don't care what they did to me, and they don't care what this guy did to this woman at work. So the damage, the violation, wasn't just a small one. It was a breach of trust that can fracture not just relationships, but reputations and communities and sometimes safety. And I'm going to be honest, I'm now looking at the San Francisco area quite differently, not because you all have a whole bunch of problems in that part of the world already, but because if this is how one of these big groups, and you all are a big group there, operates like this, you're highly hypocritical. Because you go out and teach on subjects about kink and safety and community, and you violated it. And I really want to out who you are, but unlike you, even though your comments were public, I have more respect than that. And this is going to lead me to what complicates things for some people is the intent. They'll say, I didn't mean to cause the harm. I was just trying to make a point. But here's the reality. Harm doesn't need your intent to exist. You can act out of ignorance and still hurt somebody. That's why we have this rule that says ignorance doesn't excuse the law, right? You can act out of passive aggression, spite, or even what you think is accountability and still commit a consent violation. What matters isn't just what you did, it's what you chose to do and the impact it had. And more so, in a lot of these cases, they didn't care what happened afterwards. In our spaces, we hold people accountable for harm done, regardless of what they've said. Oh, I didn't mean it that way. Right? I even talked about earlier this year the fallout that happened in Florida. Right? All of these things, it's the lack of the accountability. Some of the worst violations don't come from predators or strangers. They come from people inside of the community who should know better. People who preach consent but don't practice it when it comes to information. People who know the codes, the norms, the expectations, teach them, and then break away from them. And that's the irony here, because they teach about safety and ethics. This group teaches classes on trust and consent and safety, yet they were ready to violate it without any thought, let alone any reason, but try to do so from sort of righteous standpoint, right? What does that tell you about the type of ethics that they have? What does it tell you about the types of things that they're teaching people? Because I'm sure these things have been echoed wherever we hear when dungeons or DMs or masters or submissives or anybody who violates this time and time again, that they were the ones preaching about it. Ethical kink requires more than clear negotiation and good bedside manner. It requires discretion, respect, and a strong spine when it comes to protecting someone else's life from being put under the spotlight they didn't ask for. Outing is a failure of that ethic. And it's not bold, it's not righteous, it's a consent break. And that should matter just as much as outside the bedroom as it does in it. So does the community here have a responsibility? That's an interesting question. Because I've wrestled with this after I went and spoke to some people that I hold in confidence about this. What will be the community fallout? Probably nothing. In my terms, I've reported it to Fet. I, at this point, don't know if they're doing anything. I actually reached out to a few people I know. Thus far, I don't think anything has happened. It should have happened, right? But if we want to hold ourselves as a community and call ourselves that, then we have to act like one when something goes wrong. And that means, in this context, when we're talking about outing today, whether it's by accident or carelessness or intent, the people around them do need to step up. The ethical response isn't silence. It isn't vague neutrality, it's support. That starts with showing up for a person who is outed, not just with performative sympathy, but with real care. A message, a check-in, a clear acknowledgement that what happened to them wasn't acceptable. Because when someone's privacy has been violated, what they need most to know is that they're not alone in it, that someone sees what actually happened to them. But support is just one part, but calling out that behavior is just as critical. And this is where a lot of communities get it wrong. Now, too often people freeze up. They don't want to be seen as starting drama. They worry more about the backlash that's going to be received once it's happened, right? So now they're on the defensive. And anything they do is going to be perceived that way. Or they're connected to the person who did the outing and would rather look the other way than hold them accountable. But when someone exposes another member of the community, there has to be a response, especially if it was intentional. Pretending it didn't happen or chalking it up to a misunderstanding only tells the person who was harmed that their safety isn't worth the discomfort of the confrontation. Accountability doesn't have to be a witch hunt. but it needs to be real. And that might look temporary suspension from like a local group. It might be being asked to issue a formal acknowledgement of harm and an apology. Maybe it's stepping down from a group you lead because you violated your own ethical code. Personally, if I saw this, I would never trust that group to do anything again. But, hey, that's just me. Whatever happens here, it's not the kind of thing that is just going to smooth things over if, hey, if I hurt anyone, right? But with a direct recognition of what they did and why it was wrong. That's accountability, not some vague apology. And in some cases, where there's a real pattern of behavior or refusal to take responsibility, it might actually mean being removed from the space entirely. That's not, it's not punishment, it's protection. But none of that happens unless we take this seriously and the impact of outing and what it does. And that means pushing back hard on one of the most common toxic responses. It was just a comment. It was just words. And that line right there is what keeps people from taking harm seriously. It's what minimizes emotional damage. It's what allows a boundary violation to go unchecked because they didn't leave physical marks. But anyone who's ever been outed will tell you it's never just a comment. It's a risk. It's a disruption. For me, it was a threat. Because the words this past weekend led to exposure. And that exposure had consequences. And those consequences, for some, can wreck their jobs, their relationships, and in my case, was my safety. So when we treat outing as a minor or unintentional harm as forgivable with accountability, we fail the people we claim to care about. And that's the moment I want to stop hearing about community. Because we do talk a big game in kink spaces about safe environments and mutual respect and honoring boundaries. Well, this is where it counts. Because if you can't protect someone's privacy, then all that talk about consent and trust, honestly, doesn't mean a whole lot. Real community shows up when it's uncomfortable. And it draws a line when someone crosses one. So if you've ever been outed, the immediate emotional response here can be very overwhelming. Panic, rage, shame, fear, they all hit fast, and they don't always come in a straight line. So before anything else, you have to slow things down. That doesn't mean pretending you're fine, but it does mean giving yourself space to catch your breath so you don't react in a way that adds more chaos to a very destabilizing situation. One of the first things I recommend is don't respond publicly, right? The impulse to defend yourself is going to be strong, to correct the narrative or to fight back. That's totally understandable. But you don't owe anyone a reaction of their timeline. Your privacy was just compromised. You're allowed to pause, let the noise settle before you decide or if or how you want to say anything. In a lot of cases, your silence is not a moment of weakness, it's protection. Second, ground yourself in the present, physically. This sounds simple to a lot of people, but it actually matters. When your brain is spinning, your body needs something steady. Go for a walk, step outside, get some fresh air. Wash your hands in cold water. Feel the sensation of it. Focus on your breathing, even for 30 seconds. Now, these aren't deep therapeutic strategies. These are actually survival techniques. These pull your nervous system out of free fall and remind you that you're still here and still in control of yourself, even if someone just took a swing at your privacy. Then when you're ready, talk to someone you trust, not someone who's going to try to fix it or tell you what you should do, but someone who's going to sit with you. Naming what happened out loud can help reduce the shame spiral that often comes with being outed. And when you hold it all in, the event starts to shape your self-worth. You begin to feel like you've done something wrong, and speaking about it breaks that pattern. Now from there, start thinking about what you can reclaim. This doesn't mean launching into damage control. It means deciding what you still have ownership over, your voice, your boundaries, your next move. And maybe that actually means locking down certain accounts. In my case, I just blocked these people. And I came here. And let me be really honest with you. If you can't hear it in my voice, there's times I'm seeming a little bit more amped because it upsets me what they robbed me of. It upsets me what they've done. It upsets me that I've had to reach out to family to make sure that they're going to be okay because of the impact of what this has, right? So we learn to get control over it. We learn to work through our symptoms and what we're feeling. And in my case, I just went and talked to my friends, and I talked to a colleague and let them know. And they just listened, and they held that space for me. And that's what mattered. That's what mattered to me the most. Even if you have to write a private statement to yourself, which a friend of mine had me do, which is really great, something I forgot about. But it was just saying, here's what I need right now. Reclaiming doesn't have to be loud. It just has to be yours. And finally, don't assume this has defined your story. Being outed is a violation, but it's not the totality of who you are. You still get to decide what comes next. You still have value, you still have autonomy, and you still have your own agency. And that can be hard to feel in the moment, especially when fear is high, but it's worth holding on to. And what happened to you wasn't okay, but how you move forward on your time and in your way, that's yours. And no one gets to take that from you. And that's why I'm coming forward today to talk about this. Because this group out of San Francisco, didn't get to decide. They get to rob me of something because they felt like they could rob me of it. That's why today this is personal to me. And I'm upset because I'm disappointed. I'm not angry. I am disappointed in a community that I have spent over 2 decades in. And I became the focal point just because they don't like something I said. And it's not even something I said. They didn't even engage on what I wrote. They engaged on what I do. And I hate to tell people, and being an American, America is not the center of the world as much as a lot of Americans think it is. But, that's a different story. Look, your private life belongs to you, not in theory, not as a courtesy, as a right. And who you are in your relationships, what you do in your dynamic, where you go to play, who you have sex with, who you date, what you name in kink spaces, what fetishes you enjoy, what your erotic desires are. None of that is public property. It doesn't become fair game just because someone is curious or angry or trying to prove a point. And it sure as hell doesn't become negotiable because you speak publicly or hold a leadership role. Being visible doesn't cancel out your right to boundaries or privacy. In any ethical community that we all claim to be a part of, anonymity should be sacred. And this is especially true in kink, where privacy isn't about shame, it's about safety. It's about employment or family dynamics or social standing, and yes, emotional security. Protecting each other's privacy isn't just a nice gesture. It's one of the few things that holds the trust of this community together. And if people don't feel safe, they stop showing up. They stop engaging. And when that happens, we don't have a community, we have silence. And the truth here is, protecting someone's anonymity isn't hard. It doesn't take some moral grandstanding. It takes 1 second to ask, is this mine to share? That's it. Do I have a right to share it? That one pause can mean the difference between someone keeping their job, staying connected to their family, or sleeping at night without fear of being targeted. It's not an exaggeration. There's hundreds and hundreds of examples of this. So it's real. I've seen what happens when people don't get that space. And I want to say something to those of you who have stepped into the public roles in the kink community, whether it's through education or creation or content or leadership or just being visible. It's not lost on me that being outed or even watching someone else go through it can make you question whether being public is even worth it. For some of us, it leads to pulling back, going quiet, disappearing entirely. And that's not weakness. That's what happens when safety starts to feel negotiable. Visibility shouldn't come with a target on your back. But in this space, sometimes it does. And that's something we have to name. So I want to challenge any of you who are listening, especially those of you who hold influence in your local scenes, or you run groups, or you're going to host an event or moderate online spaces. Stop making privacy conditional. Don't wait until someone you like gets exposed before you speak up. Don't look the other way because the person doing the outing is popular or technically didn't break a rule. Ethics don't hinge on popularity, and safety doesn't, begin after the damage has already been done. And before I close, I want to leave you all with a question today. It's not rhetorical either. I want you to actually consider it. What would it look like if we treated someone's privacy with the same seriousness we expect for our own? Now, if this answer feels obvious, ask yourself if you're living that way. If it's uncomfortable, even better. Discomfort usually means we've hit something worth sitting on. I'm going to shift here a little bit. Yes, I'm working on a new worksheet for the community. I'm going to see if I can get this out. I don't know, maybe this week or next week. I've got a lot going on. I am starting my scheduling now for other shows. I've still got to get Red Warrior on. I keep apologizing to her. I'm just bad at scheduling. You know, times don't always align. I'm still going to bring Hi There Catsuit. I've got a couple other things we're doing. I have some new topics I want to get into in the future shows about service submission towards dominance that aren't about DS dynamics, like more so when somebody's injured or hurt and looking after them. I want to talk about that. That came up recently, and I think it's something of value to discuss in a future show. Again, I appreciate all of your support. Your questions are coming in from all over the world. I'm so grateful. Argentina, I didn't really know there was a big community in like Central Africa, more specifically. I don't want to mention your country yet because I'd like to talk to you a little bit more. And thank you for listening. I honestly didn't know that there's a kink community where you live. Love to talk to you more about it. I'm not talking about South Africa. I'm actually talking towards the middle on the coast, right? It's really interesting because kink is everywhere, and I think it's worth talking to. I would like to actually, barring some translation issues, there was somebody who contacted me from Russia. I wouldn't mind speaking with you and about what your scene looks like there. I think that would be a wonderful show. Again, it's a different perspective from another part of the world. And this is what this is about. How kink affects all of us in different parts of the world and what it actually unites us in, right? I know this was a heavy subject today, and I know this was definitely more personal for me, but for me, this is how I'm reclaiming my voice, or I'm trying to, because I've had to take a lot of steps because of what happened. But with that said, there are reasons I don't discuss my life, and there are reasons I keep asking in these past few weeks to stop asking, or people to stop asking about it. If I wanted to share that, I would share that, and that's my right to or not to share that. I'm not asking for anything from anybody. I am asking for the same rights of privacy you do, right? No one's taking your photos and putting them out there online for the world to see. Even if you are, that's still your right to do it. That doesn't give me the right to go and share it with your family or your coworkers or your school or your church or wherever else you inhabit that's outside of these spaces. So respect people, right? I know it's not my typical show, but yeah. The effects are still real. And obviously it can happen to anyone. I just didn't think it was going to happen to me. But, you know, here we are. We're all human. Even me. Anyways, that's enough. I'm not going to even do any promotions today or anything else. You all have heard it before. I appreciate all of you. Thank you for listening to this one. It's something I just needed to say and kind of move through. Until next time, everybody, be safe, be respectful, stay kinky.